Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks for hanging on. Sorry for the brief delay here. We're just troubleshooting some audio issues, but I think we've got everything all sorted out now. So thanks for joining us today for our live discussion. We're going to be talking about advanced on-page SEO. Real quick, just want to do an introduction here before I bring on our guests. So my name is Tyler Hakes. I am the principal and strategy director at Optimist. We're a content marketing agency, and we work primarily with technology companies, SaaS businesses, and startups. And we just launched a new growth community. It's created for anyone who's involved in content marketing, inbound, SEO, any of those sort of disciplines. This live stream that we're doing now is just one of the kind of educational opportunities that we're trying to create for folks in the community. It's called Top of the Funnel. And you can check it. Just go to Optimist, yesoptimist.com/tofu, TOFU. It's a free Slack group. Anyone can sign up, and there's a lot of great networking going on already. We just launched it this week, and we've got about 200 members already, and there's lots of work opportunities and things like that being definitely you. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest here and introduce him, and we'll get things underway. So, super excited. We have Mike Sonders, who is our guest today, going to be discussing advanced SEO, on-page SEO. He's an SEO consultant. He's got a ton of experience both in-house and as a freelancer himself. And he actually works with myself and the Optimist team on our client work for doing SEO research and strategy. Thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, for our discussion today, we're gonna pick Mike's brain a little bit about creating content that ranks or ranks better. If you have content out there that's already ranking, but maybe you want to get more value out of it, or you want to move up in the SERPs. Obviously on-page SEO is not the whole game, but I think it's a big part of it, and there's there's been a lot of change recently, so it's a good time to kind of revisit all of the basics and then sort of talk through some of the more advanced stuff that's happening in the SEO universe. For today, we're gonna do kind of a quick primer on some of the on-page SEO basics, but then we're gonna move into some of those advanced strategies. So, Mike, are you ready to get started?
I am.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive right in. So, Mike, let's just start with a little bit with your background. So obviously you've worked with a number of different companies over the years, Spoke and Zynga and a bunch of these other guys, and doing a lot of different types of SEO and other content work. So can you just give us an overview? How does SEO kind of fit into the work that you've done over the years?
So I've worked in growth for, I'm looking at my watch like that's going to tell me what the year is, for about 15 years. Since I graduated from business school on the West Coast, I've been working with startups and tech companies on growth. And I actually started on the product management side. It wasn't until more recent years where that growth work started transitioning to pure marketing. But one of the first jobs, if you want to call it that I had after I got my graduate degree was as a startup founder. And I made every single mistake a founder can make, and that startup crashed and burned. But the point of the story, of that short, sad story, is that one of the marketing efforts I tried at the time, when blogs were still sort of relatively new and they were an attractive channel, was I started a blog for the company, and because I wanted to understand what motivated bloggers, and so I could communicate with them better. And that blog I started was the only thing that survived that startup. And indeed, it actually got up to, from working on it in my part time and plugging away on that blog, it made it up to 100,000 uniques from organic channels per month, which is pretty good for some random schmoes blog that they built up not really knowing anything. And this was kind of my crash course and figuring out all the wrong things to do with SEO, kind of stumbling into success. So after that, even as I was working at big tech companies like Zynga, working on traditional product management roles, still in my free time, I was studying SEO and keeping the blog going. And long story short, as I was in my day jobs, kind of transitioning to marketing roles. In fact, my last full-time role was as head of marketing for a Series B startup in Silicon Valley a few years ago. I was still in the background. I still had this interest and passion for making content work. And in fact, at some point, I made my full-time job. I switched my full-time job to go work for Upworthy back in their heyday, because I was so interested in seeing what they were doing behind the scenes to optimize their content and understand what was working for them, aside from clickbait at the time. And a few years ago, I was taking a hiatus from the startup world, like so many of us end up doing after burning out working these startup jobs. Happened to start talking to some friends who had a startup, and they needed some help with content. And I was like, I kind of know something about that. I'll help you out with that. And again, medium to longer story short, that's kind of how I stumbled into consulting. Ever since then, I've been consulting full-time, helping mostly SaaS companies. Like 4 out of 5 of my clients are SaaS companies, helping them figuring out SEO and content strategy. The other 20% of companies I work with are usually companies are interesting to me because they help me exercise the muscles I wouldn't otherwise get to exercise with SaaS companies. So, for example, I'm working with the Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, their foundation, meta.org, this site that's trying to solve problems in the world through the open sharing of scientific knowledge. They've got a website with 20 million plus pages that they need to get indexed and ranked. And that's not a typical problem you get to work on with SaaS companies. Not a lot of SaaS companies have 20 million pages you have to manage. So that's an interesting challenge. But yeah, that's me.
Wow, that's exciting. What was it like getting that email?
from the Zuckerberg, from meta.org, from CZI?
Yeah.
It was, I mean, like, as with so many consultants, it was a referral. It was like a friend had a friend, a friend who I had a friend who was leading growth on that team and was like, hey, you should talk to Mike. And we had a conversation and hit it off. And yeah, that's how so much of the work happens these days.
For sure,
as you know.
For sure. Yeah, well, I was gonna say, speaking of you and I, obviously work together on SEO, and I think we're in that bucket of clients that you're working with, mostly SaaS companies, but maybe for everyone else's benefit, do you want to talk a little bit about the process that we go through when when we're working?
Sure.
Together, our strategies.
Yeah, I think without getting too much in the weeds of my very extensive keyword research process that involves a lot of specialized tools I've built. And I think that what's really the important takeaway is that we focus on intent, which I think will be a recurring theme as we're talking today, and specifically on keywords that have the intent that allow us to present our customers and their solutions in a contextual and attractive way. Like the most, we talk about jobs to be done a lot. So those are interesting keywords to get in front of when a potential customer, someone in our target market, is searching for something where our product or our client service is a clear solution for them. It could help them solve their problem. It's getting in front of those queries where we can genuinely be helpful with the content, create some like genuinely helpful how-to content, but seamlessly and without being like pushy and salesy and gross, say, by the way, here is how you could solve this particular problem using our software, for example. Which is a lot better at driving leads and interest than, for example, a definitional query like what is marketing technology, what is a marketing stack, what is workflow automation, what is a CRM, right? Like, that's not going to drive a lot of leads. That's not going to drive a lot of interesting visits. That's why we tend to focus on queries where we can really strongly demonstrate the client's expertise and how that and the value of their product without being too pushy and salesy about it. Actually, like driving value and being helpful to the reader.
Yeah, and I think that we'll get back to this a little bit as we talk about search intent. But I mean, that's one thing that I know you and I have a lot of conversations around, is sort of really thinking about the funnel. And we don't necessarily think of the funnel as a linear process or anything like that, but we definitely think about sort of where the buyer is in thinking about their problem or looking for a solution, right? And I think a lot of people like you said, I think they sort of go for what I would consider kind of a pre-funnel query, which is what is the basic things or something that's relevant to the market, but it's not directly related to a problem or a solution. Or they go to sort of the bottom of the funnel and they want to rank, number one for content marketing, which is great. And if you can do it, that's wonderful. But there's a whole other sort of this job's to be done, and really like sort of the true top of the funnel. The easy example is for us, as a content marketing agency, most people don't necessarily come in thinking, I want to hire a content marketing agency. They come in thinking, hey, I'm looking for solutions for how to grow my SaaS business.
Yep.
So if we can rank for that query, we're getting people right at the beginning of that journey and really getting them in the top of the funnel. And then we can kind of nurture them through the process and say, to your point, right? Like, hey, the solution to growth for your SaaS business could be content marketing and SEO. And here's what that looks like.
Well put. At some point, I'm going to switch this. I'm going to start interviewing you.
I was gonna say, I think I've told that to one or two people in my day.
Yeah, it sounds polished. I feel like maybe you know what you're talking about.
Great. Well, cool. Well, thanks. Appreciate the intro there for everyone who may not be familiar with you and your work. Why don't we jump into some of the stuff that we want to talk about today? On-page optimization, obviously, is a pretty broad topic. So we'll try to kind of find the stuff that people may not know about. But let's start with kind of the most basics. When you think about the idea of on-page optimization, how does that weigh versus all the other factors that go into SEO? Technical SEO, off-page stuff, links, and all the other moving parts.
Sure. I mean, so I think you just mentioned the three main pillars of SEO, which are content, links, and technical SEO. And technical SEO is just an intimidating way of saying making sure your site is set up correctly, right? And I'm not a particularly technical person, but a lot of technical SEO is certainly within my grasp that I can help clients with. So it's a lot worse than it sounds. It really depends on the site. If you're and this is kind of the approach with new clients that I take, is we really have to assess where they stand, partly relative to their competitors, how new their site is, how much cruft they've added to their site relative to how many links they already have. Because the fact is, if you have a lot of links, if you have a lot of good, authoritative, relevant links from sites, Google will forgive a lot in terms of technical SEO. It will forgive a lot. Right? You can still be very successful with your content. This is all assuming you've got solid content. If you've got links, you're already well on your way. With a newer site that doesn't have as many links, doesn't have as much authority in Google's eyes, then I tend to suggest they be a little more picky about making sure their site is super clean and set up super well. And then we go down the long checklist of technical SEO things and make sure they're in good shape. I tend to spend less time on that kind of stuff with more established websites where they've got a backlink profile. And it's not a great use of time to focus on technical SEO. We can knock out the most important things, but otherwise we should be focusing on driving the right kind of traffic with the right kind of content.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I think, that I always think of it as like a baseline, is that kind of how you think about it too? It's like, as long as you meet kind of like a minimum threshold of like, I've got an H1 tag or whatever that threshold is, that's kind of the minimum hurdle.
There are definitely some basics when we get into headlines and like H1 tags. I think of that more as, I put that more in my content bucket, making sure your content is set up correctly, less technical SEO. But to your point, there are definitely some like very basic things for technical SEO that I want to make sure we're hitting, that are, as you said, baseline. Right. They're kind of like the price of entry. Things like, if your whole site is set up in JavaScript where you could be using HTML, you're making Google's job understanding your site super hard. And even with a lot of links, we probably want to use as much HTML as possible just to keep things very simple for Google. Things like that. Yeah. But at an individual piece of content level, there's not a lot of technical SEO stuff that you can worry about aside from site speed, right? Because site speed there are many ranking factors. Certainly, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot by using beautiful uncompressed images that slow down the loading of the page. But yeah, I think that's it. As far as like baseline stuff at the content level, really site speed is the thing that a writer, for example, is going to have control over, a content creator.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess let's talk a little bit about that. So on page SEO, sort of the content uh, element of SEO. What's sort of the basic checklist of like stuff that you're going to run through with a
Yeah.
client, or as you're looking at a page or an article or whatever that you're trying to rank? How do you, what are the factors that you're looking at?
Right. So if you have spent any time on the internets looking up things like how to do on-page SEO, the typical piece of content will indeed, it will give you this checklist of stuff, right? Like your keyword should be in the title tag, your keyword should be in the headline. And certainly, as far as my checklist is concerned, that's where I start. Those are two important things. A short descriptive URL that it contains the keyword, preferably. By the way, that's not a direct ranking factor. That's just to improve click-through rates from search. And we've just seen that there's a high correlation between short headlines, short URLs that contain the keyword and better click-through rates. Beyond that, I don't have much of a checklist. Because the way I look at the pages is I start with the intent of the keyword. What are we trying to rank for?
Right.
And it's kind of subjective and kind of objective. And I'll say, okay, we're trying to rank for, and I'll go back to my example, how to automate workflows in my company, how to automate workflows. So I'm going to look at this and say, okay, if I were an expert in workflow automation, does this piece of content satisfy my desire to learn about the topic at hand? So is the information exhaustive enough? And this is, it's not about having a certain keyword count of words. Sometimes you can exhaustively answer a question and do it in less than 1,000 words. That's definitely possible. The intent of what is the weather today, you can answer that in 5 words or less, and you're all done. You've hit your SEO targets. It's not a great query to want to target because Google's going to steal that traffic from you anyway in the search results. But for a more informative information intense kind of topic where somebody's trying to answer a question, as long as I feel like the piece satisfies their intent in every way, that's my litmus test. We've got the keyword in the headline, we've got the keyword in the title. Great. From there, I'm looking for, does this feel like it was written by an expert and feels like the best, most satisfying response? And here are some of the things that indicate that is the case.
Sure.
One, I read through it, and I don't necessarily have any more unanswered questions about that topic. I might have the logical next question now that you've answered that question for me. And does the article provide links to resources that answer that logical next question? Great, help me go down the rabbit hole, right? Like Wikipedia is great at this. You start on Wikipedia and you want to learn about something and you're like, oh, that's okay. And you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into the Wikipedia hole. That's that is intent being satisfied. You've answered your question and your interest is piqued even more. You want to learn more about this subject. So you keep clicking links to related content to expand your knowledge and learn even more. That's a good indication that you're serving intent really well. Is a graph or an illustration really going to illustrate your point? Why haven't you included that in the piece, right? Like that's comprehensive content. What else? I really like to see that, right? Like trust and authority is important depending on the topic. The author, what kind of credentials do they have that make me think like, okay, I should trust their opinion on this particular piece of information. So it's less about hitting the specific checklist of things, this many keyword counts, this many images. It's more about if an expert was to look at your piece and you say, okay, how did I do here? If they go, yeah, no, you answered the questions here and you provided all the supporting information and illustrations and maybe videos are appropriate, and you've links to relevant content to let them keep going down the rabbit hole, that's a good piece of content, right? If you're doing that right, you're not going to need to worry about hitting the right word count because you will naturally, you will expand to the right length that is appropriate given the question of the key behind the keyword. You won't have to worry about making sure you mention the keyword enough times in the article because it will naturally happen, right? Like I almost never tell clients like a specific number of times to mention the keyword because they end up getting too caught up in this idea like, oh, there's a rule behind how many times we should mention it, and it almost starts to feel unnatural because they're trying to shove it into the no, if you're being comprehensive, like it will happen naturally, right? So yeah, I try not to be too prescriptive about checklists when it comes to quality of content.
For sure, yeah, and I think so. I want to come back to the idea of search, and that's one they have various level or understanding. I think we can definitely unpack that. But I want to kind of recap what you just said, because I think it's super duper important. Which is that there are a lot of, as you said, prescriptive sort of best practices, where people talk about keyword density and using the keywords in your headings and all that stuff. And certainly that is correlated with rankings. But I think the overarching thing for people to understand is that really what that is a proxy for matching the search intent, right? So should you use the target keyword in your H1 and your H2 tags wherever possible? Yes, but the reasoning behind that is really because it gives context and understanding to the reader more so than because it's a ranking factor on its own. Would you agree with that sort of summarization?
So we know that having the keyword in the title and the headline, which are usually very similar anyway, is highly correlated with better rankings. So that's just a safe thing to do. And as with all things, and sorry, I'm going to go down a side road for a second, because I think it's an important point to draw out, is Google is interested in doing the right thing for the searcher, right? At the end of the day, they want the search results to be super satisfying, right? Trustworthy, authoritative, having a good, fast, clean user experience, really, and answering the question, answering the query that you entered in. Because the more you're satisfied by your experience with Google, the more you go back to Google, the more opportunity they have to show you ads. It's a very, very simple formula. So all the things, it's almost a one-to-one relationship between like the things Google is looking for in SEO and the things people doing searches on Google are looking for. They're very tightly aligned. So at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff you could be doing to improve your chances, improve your rankings on Google are very much aligned with, am I doing the right thing for my user here? If I get in the mindset of the user of the visitor who entered this query into Google and landed on my site, am I giving them everything that they would possibly want for the most satisfying result? And so circling back around to the point about the keyword showing up in the title tag and the headline, if you think about it, this from the user experience, if they search for what is workflow automation, and in the title that shows up in the Google search results, it says, what is workflow automation, a complete guide, you're like, even without thinking about it, your brain is going, hey, that's the thing I just entered in. That's the thing I want. Right. So again, it's good for your SEO. It's also, why is it good for SEO? Because, by the way, it's really good for your user experience as well. It's a really clear signal. Hey, this is the result you want.
Yeah, and I think that same concept sort of flows into the writing and the content itself too, right? So again, if you're thinking about keyword density, it's like, well, why is keyword density even a thing that people talk about? And I think it's because clear and precise language is just better for the user. And so if you're saying, hey, this is how you do it, that's not clear. But if you say, here's how you can implement workflow automation, that's much clearer. It's more precise. The user can better understand what you're explaining. You're talking.
100%, 100%. And I think that gets to one of the quibbles I have sometimes with even experienced writers. And sometimes, and this happens both in blog content and also in marketing site content, right? Like feature pages, things like that. There's this urge to be clever rather than clear, right? To use a quip or a pun or something that, right, like adds a little personality to your copy. And this is less about SEO and more about copywriting, but it just happens to be better for SEO, that always favor clear over clever. Right, you're not doing your visitor any favors, because really, again, it always comes back to what is going to be the best for your visitor, for your customer, for your potential customer, and it's being clear and making sure you're helping them understand. It's them being impressed with how quippy and clever you are. That doesn't improve their day. That doesn't help them in their user journey, right? Like, it might make you feel briefly better, but at the end of the day, it's always much better to be clear. So when I think about on-page stuff, I really like seeing, and and again, it gets back to what's best for the visitor, is seeing a really cleanly structured, easy to scan page, right? Really good use of headlines, so I can scan the piece and say like, okay, here's all the different information I'm going to get about this piece. And if you're being really quippy and clever with your headlines, I have to actually stop and think, which is annoying to people, right? Like one of the main rules of website design is don't make me think. Right? Like make your headlines super clear. What are we talking about here? What are we covering? That's the best possible thing you can do for your reader and your visitor and your customer.
That's a great point. I think a lot of people, don't necessarily think about this, but content and copy and all the things that we talk about and we do every day is really a subset of UX from a web perspective. And so it's really about the user experience and serving the user, which I think is a wonderful way to think about it. Cool. Well, thanks for explaining that. I want to circle back again, like I said, and kind of dive in a little bit deeper to the idea of search intent, because I think that's a super important thing that, again, I think people have sort of various levels of familiarity there. So maybe let's start at the beginning. When you talk about search intent, kind of give us the overview of it and kind of how you think about that.
Yeah. So intent is very simply, it's given a particular keyword that someone might type into Google, what do they want? Right, and we can kind of characterize their different wants. When I'm working with my clients, when I'm working with you, there are two major categories, and certainly we can segment them even further. But there are two major categories. There's informational intent, right? I'm looking for information like how to do something. Very common intent for that matches up with the kind of content that we put on blog posts. Here's how to do such and such. Here's a list of things you need to know. It's information. Versus commercial intent, which is something like I'm looking for a CRM, or I am looking for a workflow automation solution or software, right? Like if the word software, solution, tool, platform, app shows up in the keyword, pretty strong confidence that it has commercial intent and that they're more interested in landing on a marketing site than they are in landing on a blog. But when we're talking about blog.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, let me just stop you there for a second, because I think that's a really important point. So yeah, when you think about informational versus sort of commercial intent, thing that you want a lot is what kind of page sort of corresponds to that? Can you unpack that a little bit more, like sort of a blog content versus a marketing page, etc.?
Sure. So when I work with clients, when we do our keyword research, and this is where I see a lot of companies struggle, is they'll find a keyword that's clearly relevant to them, right? I use an example that has nothing to do with any of my clients, which is chat software, a very intercom type thing, right? Like on-site web chat software. They see this keyword, and maybe the keyword is chat software. Some amount of people every month are searching for chat software on the web. They see this keyword and they're like, oh, that's super relevant to us. We should create content around that. And a lot of times when people think content, their mind automatically goes to blog posts. Right? Content is really anything on your website. It's marketing pages, it's PDF case studies, it's webinar landing pages. Anything that has a URL is content, as far as when I'm talking about content. But a lot of times people go right to blog post. And so they'll say, okay, so chat software, we're going to write a blog post about what you should look for in your chat software. And that's fine. That's a good blog post to have, especially when you're cultivating a lead down your funnel. But if you look at the intent of chat software, and by the way, the cheat code to figuring out the intent behind something is to look at the first page of search results. Does the first page of search results, does it have a lot of blog pages in the top 10? Or is it a bunch of marketing pages? Is it a bunch of feature pages and home pages? If it's a bunch of marketing pages and feature pages, that's what you should be doing too. One of the things my clients, I'm sure, are sick of hearing me say is let's not fight what's working. We need to lean into what's working, right? We might want this page. We might think we want this page to rank for keyword X, but Google is getting us a lot of traffic for keyword Y. And if keyword Y is super relevant, I don't care if it has lower search volume. I'm going to optimize the page around keyword Y, because clearly that's what Google thinks is right for us. And if it's relevant, the higher relevance, the more people are going to convert. But getting back to intent, if I type that keyword in on the homepage and I see that most of the results are home pages and feature pages, that's what I should be building. I shouldn't be going against the grain, because that's going to make it harder for me to rank. And it's not going to. And the point is, it's not going to be what the person searching for that keyword wants.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And if we can sort of circle back to the idea of the funnel, I think this is another great takeaway here, is that it's really about kind of where the customer is in their journey. And if they are searching for live chat software, they've already identified that as a solution, which from your perspective as the company is good, because they're further in their journey. So if they land on your site, they're actually closer to the point of purchase than someone who's looking for live chat best practices or something that doesn't signal as much buying intent.
Exactly, which is why when I work with especially SaaS clients, we start at the bottom of the funnel, which is what you're describing. The bottom of the funnel, meaning they're closer to making a buying decision. So when somebody is making a commercial search, like I'm looking for live chat software, commercial intent like that usually means they're closer to making a buying decision than if they were searching for, why should I use live chat software, right? They're just in the beginning stages of their buying journey. And that's a fine piece of content we should have, informational content we should have on our blog, because then we can start cultivating them, making a case for why you should want live chat software. And the kind of conversion you would try at that point, it's a toss-up where maybe you want to convert them to a white paper or your newsletter, or maybe even try to get a free trial out of them. A free trial might be appropriate at that point. It'd be debatable. But at the bottom of the funnel, even though the volume is lower for most of these search terms, you're more likely to get those conversions and free trials and subsequently revenue, which is really what clients want, which is why we generally start there in our strategy and work our way up.
Yeah. So I think a key kind of takeaway or strategy that people can apply here with respect to search intent, and this is the process that you and I generally go through, right, is what most people do is they'll go fire up Ahrefs, they'll do a bunch of keyword research, they'll throw all those keywords into a spreadsheet, and then they'll say, okay, for every single keyword on this list, we need to make a blog post about this topic. And I think the first step that they're skipping is really understanding that search intent, as you said, and then segmenting those keywords to say, okay, is this a commercial keyword? And if so, maybe the right choice is a product marketing page versus a blog or a guide about that topic.
Exactly.
And then I think, from there, I would say the really simple litmus test, as Mike, as you mentioned, is just do the search, right? I mean, I think so many people skip that step. They just see the keyword in the list and they jump right on it. But do the search. Is it actually relevant? And what kind of content or what kind of pages is relevant to this result?
Well put.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I think that's a huge one, because I think that's something that we talk a lot about with clients, and I know you and I obviously have had many discussions about kind of advanced strategy that seems obvious, but so many people skip that. I think it's just so important. So glad we got to kind of dive into that. Cool. So I want to pivot a little bit. This is still a little bit related, but one of the other things that we think a lot about from like an SEO perspective, and you sort of alluded to this. So maybe let's start with the click-through rate, the idea of click-through rate. So I think that's something that is a little bit more advanced, but it kind of ties in all of these other factors that people know about, even if they don't necessarily know that. So maybe can you talk a little about what click-through rate is and how that applies from an SEO perspective?
Sure. So here's how I think about click-through rate, and it's similar to the question about the checklist of on-page things. We can get into a long discussion about all the research about how much of a ranking factor click-through rate from search results. When we talk about click-through rate, by the way, just for clarity, we're talking about when somebody does a search and the results come up, what's the rate at which they click on your particular result? Which is great when they click, because that means you're getting a visit and you're getting an opportunity to get them to do whatever next step you want them to do. Like sign up for a free trial, or sign up for your newsletter, or get an impression so you can remarket to them, whatever your goal is. We like impressions, right? Like we like impressions of our content. This is one of those things that's not worth complicating too much, right? The short story on whether it's a ranking factor or not is sometimes it seems like it probably is, but we'll never know 100% for sure. we know that when Google is running,
right?
as is Google, exactly. Like we'll never know for sure, but it's okay. I'll tell you in a minute why it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether we know it's a ranking factor or not. We know that they use click-throughs in their experiments, for example, to see how well their experiments are going. We know that in testimony to Congress, they've admitted to using click-through rates as a measurement. We don't know in what context and what scenarios. There have been not quite pure experiments done that have indicated that, yes, click-through rates are an important ranking factor. There are a lot of reasons why it's not practical for click-through rates to be a meaningful ranking factor. Like so 15% of the searches Google gets every day, it's never seen before. That's mind-blowing, right? Like that's the huge volume of really long tail, low volume searches that Google is getting. It doesn't make sense to use click-through rates on those really low volume searches because statistics says like you need a large volume to get any meaningful insight from those click-through rates for them to be helpful. So all that aside, there's a lot of fun stuff we can speculate about and think about, but at the end of the day, clicks are important to us regardless of whether they're important to Google. This is one of those things where what's important to us aligns with what's important to Google. We want the clicks, right? We want to be good at getting click-through rates because it's one thing to rank. It's another thing to get actual visits to your site. And what we want is the visits. Ranking is a vanity metric until you get the clicks and the visits, right? When I was at Upworthy, they were ruthless. So I was on the product team there. I wasn't on content, but they were ruthless at testing headlines. And I think we all kind of respect the importance of headlines and how important they are to clicks. But when you think about, they're really critical. When you think about what shows up in search results, you only have effectively 3 elements to convince somebody to click. You have your title tag, which is basically the headline of your content that shows up in Google. You have your URL and you have your meta description. And Ahrefs showed in a recent study that you can't even control what Google shows in your meta description field more than 50% of the time. More than 50% of the time, they seem to show something else than that beautiful meta description that you crafted, right? So it's important to craft a good one for the times when it does show up. That's your opportunity to convince somebody to click. But really, your biggest opportunity to convince somebody to click is your headline. And at Upworthy, we saw very clear examples where we thought we had a good headline, but we kept iterating and testing, and literally the difference in traffic was over 500%.
Wow.
Just because of the headline, So the headlines are super, super important. And we won't get into like all the things that make a good headline. And certainly Google is making it more difficult these days by increasing the size of the pixels and decreasing the number of characters you can use in the headline, right? Like we're having to be more and more creative with how we create a evocative, compelling headline in less space. But really, that's so important. Because at the end of the day, that's our best and one opportunity to get people to click, which great. If we're improving our chances of ranking at the same time, that's fantastic. But really what we want is that traffic, and that's why clicks are important. And anyway, I'm getting off my soapbox now and knocking it over. But did that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that we go through with clients a lot too, is sort of choosing that headline or choosing that title and really crafting it in a way that makes the most sense. I think the way that we think about it, at least, is there's sort of 2 elements of it. And again, we don't want to go too far in the weeds here, but basically, first of all, you need a signal right away that's relevant to the intent, right? So it needs to, as we talked about before, matching the keywords of the title is huge, not because Google likes it, will see that and instantly know this title is relevant to the thing that I'm looking for. And then I think with whatever sort of character limit you have left, is trying to advance the benefit of your link versus everyone else's. So what am I going to get by reading this that I might not be able to get in the next article on the list? It's
basic like product positioning, right? It's like how will you meet their need while also showing that you're differentiated from your competitors? It's like, what's special and compelling about your link versus all the other 10 things you need to know about live chat software? Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Good way to think about it. I think that's great. It's almost like a little mini product launch for every single page, really.
Absolutely, 100% it is. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So I think that was a great way to kind of frame the idea of click-through rate. So what I want to talk about next is sort of the other side of that coin. So let's say your click-through rate's humming along, you got traffic flowing. Once people get onto your page, the other thing that a lot of people talk about impacting SEO, bounce rate, time on page, those sort of engagement metrics with the content itself. What do we know about that?
So again, I'm going to try not to go down a rabbit hole of the things we kind of know and that we are forced to speculate on. But again, I'm going to simplify it tremendously. Don't worry about time on page, bounce rate, and dwell rate, which, by the way, are all different things that all kind of fall under the umbrella of how much time is somebody spending on your content. Don't think of them in terms of how they affect your rankings. Of all the things that affect your rankings, of which there are many, there are almost certainly other things that would make a bigger impact if we spent that time thinking about them, like building more links, right? Improving our headlines. But really, when it comes down to it, this falls under that idea of serving the intent. Have we satisfied the intent? Would an expert look at this and go, okay, you've really included everything here that's gonna answer the question that they implicitly had when they entered this query into Google? Because again, and I'm trying so hard not to go down the rabbit hole, but I'll have to just a little bit. One of the inherent limits of using dwell time as a ranking factor is different questions, the answers associated with them they imply different levels of engagement. The answer to, it's not going to take you very long to read the answer to, what is the weather today? The dwell time there is probably going to be 3 seconds and then you're good, right? The answer to what should I look for in live chat software, you expect longer engagement with that content, assuming that content is quality and keeps your attention. The rabbit hole is Google has actually patented this idea that it can identify the different topics of content and how that relates to expected dwell time. So presumably it knows for a weather query you are expected to spend less time, but that it actually uses this or not? No, we don't know if it uses it or not. But again, it doesn't matter, because as long as we're doing a good job of satisfying the intent, we've made the content scannable and clear and easy to read and interesting and informative, and we've cut the fat and we're answering their question clearly, and we're differentiated, like we're better than everybody else. We're using helpful illustrations and graphs and videos and giving them relevant links to even more resources. As long as we're nailing that, that's one of the other things that this time spent on content that will fall into place. Now, if you've invested a lot in a particular piece of content and you want to make sure you've done right, I think certainly it's useful to use, for example, heat maps, like the kind of thing you can get from Hotjar. I think you can use engagement time, whether it's from Google Analytics or another package, to say, like, okay, is there a part in this content where we've clearly lost them and they're dropping off, and maybe we need to figure out how to tweak that to keep them engaged longer? Like, that's fantastic. But don't think of it in terms of like, oh, this is going to help us rank better. Yeah, it might, maybe. Again, there are things we could talk about, that reasons that Google can or cannot actually see these ideas. One thing it can see is when you go back to search results from the content, right? So if you're bouncing pogo sticking back to the search results, it can see that. Do we know if that's bad or not? We don't know. But it's for your own sake, right? Like, if you're really trying to create the best possible content, if you have a steep drop off, let's say a quarter or halfway through, we probably want to work on that, because we know our content's not quite there yet. It's not quite sterling quality. And if this is something you've invested a lot in, then it's probably worth tweaking. This is something that they did a lot at Upworthy as well, to really good effect. Scroll maps and time on site.
Oh, that's super interesting. And I think that's a great point. It's just, I think it's one of those things, again, where unfortunately Google is ultimately a black box, right? We don't know exactly what factors they're using or to what extent they're using them, but we know how the perceived or the guesses of which factors work, how that dovetails into the business value that we're ultimately creating with SEO, which at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? Is what are we serving the user, and then are we using that to achieve a specific business goal?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when we think about like dwell time and engagement time, like yes, maybe that can help our rankings to some extent, but ultimately the reason why we care about that is because we want users to stay on our site and convert into some kind of in some way, right?
And you said, and I think more specifically, you said it. If we're serving our users, if we're serving the visitors, if we're thinking in terms of like, okay, what are they looking for, and how can we share what we have in terms of our expertise or our offerings that makes their lives better, we're going to win, right? We don't have to be selfish. If we are thinking about how we serve the user, we're going to win. And I think this is a huge misconception that continues even today about SEO, which is like, oh, we've created, especially, I got to tell you, especially among designers. I feel like especially among designers, there's this bias against SEO that because there's this idea that, okay, we've made something beautiful for our users, but oh, now we have to SEO it, which means we're serving the robots and the algorithms, and it's going to diminish the user experience. It's like, no, they're almost perfectly aligned these days. If we are doing the right thing for the user, satisfying their intent, we are doing the right thing for SEO 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. And I think, I would say personally, I think we see that discussion less, because I think most people at this point understand sort of inherently that Google's algorithm at this point is not their best guess at what people want. It's data driven. It is based on what people do and how they respond to different circumstances. So it really is pretty well aligned with what people want and what people find valuable. Going back to this idea of sort of the on-page engagement, and again, sort of throwing out the idea of whether or not that is a direct ranking record or not, I think it's an important thing. What are the sort of the specific like elements or pieces of content that you think about as improving that engagement or that dwell time or reducing bounce rate, etc.?
Oh, I mean, I don't think it's anything I haven't mentioned already. I mean, it's one of those things where you know good content when you see it, right? It's certainly we know bad content when we see it. It loads slowly. It looks incredibly outdated. The text is too small. There's like super cheesy stock photos or even worse, like cheesy 90s era or 80s era like cartoon illustrations. You're like, what were you thinking here? The content is in huge blocks of text instead of nicely broken up for the web to be easy to scan. There's pop-ups. There's really annoying pop-ups. They block your experience on mobile, right? A lot of these things, by the way, that are annoying to us, they're negative ranking signals to Google. If you block the content with a pop-up, make it impossible for the user to interact on mobile, that's a ding on your ranking as well. Like really the user experience and Google's desire really align. But just like we know bad content, like we know good content when we see it too. And it's in the details, right? So it's all the things I talked about, like being scannable and helpful illustrations and contextual, relevant, helpful links, clear over clever, having nice headlines. But it's right, like design, this is a little more squishy because it's not necessarily something that will get you better rankings, but certainly in the interest of treating your users well, which should be number one, having a beautiful, nicely designed piece of content is a boon as well. And it helps your SEO in more indirect ways, like something that's super highly produced. I mean, you and your team might have a better sense of this than I do because I spend less time doing backlink building these days, but something that's clearly highly produced and that has high production value, like looks beautiful and has an interesting interactive element to it. It's probably easier to get links to, for example, than some like run-of-the-mill blog post in your standard WordPress template. And those backlinks are going to help all of your content rank.
Right.
So it all matters. That experience matters. The being able to look at it and going, yeah, this is really good. Like if you're looking at it and going like, yeah, this is really good, and you can back that up with data, like looking at your heat maps, looking at time on site, looking at the interactions. Yeah, that's a good sign that it's positioned well to rank.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk about a lot on our team and as we're creating content is yeah, it's thinking about that reading experience. And again, it all comes back to user experience, right? And those are, again, the same factors that Google is using are ultimately whatever the data shows serves the user the best. And so, if you just think for 2 seconds about how you as a user consume content, the first thing you do is you load the site on your phone or your computer or whatever, you scroll to the bottom. You get to think, how much value is it going to provide me? And so I think of that as sort of like the frontline element that's going to keep someone engaged, is like, I need to show value right away at a scan. And the ways that I do that are really, really great images, some kind of data visualization or chart or diagram that I see that and say, I don't know what that means yet, but I want to find out because it looks like it's going to teach me something good. I think that's a huge one. As we talked about before, headlines, right? So yes, using keywords and headlines is good, but more importantly is providing context about the various aspects or parts of the topic that you're going to explain to the reader. Because again, that's how I'm deciding, is this worth my time? As a reader, do I want to spend the time to read this thing? So I think that's an important one. And then, you also mentioned, Mike, I think this is another important thing, which it hurts my heart a little bit to say this, but I think in a lot of ways, the style and the format of the writing is often almost more important than the writing itself. As you said, like, if everything is a big block of text, it feels hard to approach for user, right? So how can you break that up? And the way that I personally think about it, and we talk about it with the team, is where are sort of the entry points for the reader? So again, they're going to scan the whole article and then they're going to look for kind of a place, where do I start? And sometimes they'll go to the top, but a lot of times they'll say, there's a punchy short sentence. Boom, that's where my eye goes. And now I'm going to jump into the article right there. And so thinking about sort of how many hooks and sort of entry points you create in your content. And again, I think all of those elements, with a short sentence that breaks up big paragraphs, a great graphic, a good headline, all of those sort of visual and content elements work together to really kind of improve the overall engagement.
The sad thing is, now that we're talking about heartburn, the sad thing is sometimes you don't even need a beautiful, like, because I want to treat the reader well, I want everything to be as nice as we can make it, as high quality as we can make it. But sometimes the fact is, in terms of ranking, you don't necessarily have to be amazing. You just have to be better than everybody else. Again, we can relate this to product marketing, right? It's like, you don't necessarily have to have the best product ever. You just have to be better than the alternatives. So sometimes the winning move is simply going through and saying, okay, if I want to satisfy user intent here behind this query, and maybe I'm not necessarily an expert, because this is the common situation for a lot of writers. They're not necessarily like the most expert in this field, but they still have to write the content. The cheat code is, look at the content that ranks in the top 10 results, make sure you're covering all the things that they're covering. And since they will sometimes tend to be piecemeal, if you can have the most comprehensive piece that covers everything, even if it's not brilliant, even if it's not, even if it's maybe would get the B+ from an actual expert, if it's better and more comprehensive than everybody else, that puts you in a really good position to win.
That's a good thing to keep in mind, right? SEO is graded on a curve.
Yes.
Great. Well, real quick,
as in life,
we're about at our hour here. I just want to check. I got some other topics I'd love to run through if you have a little bit more time. Is that okay?
Sure, of course.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll try to scoot us through some of these a little bit more quickly. So first of all, I want to talk about the idea of LSI. For people, latent search indexing, I think is the correct acronym there. And kind of how that plays into SEO in the modern era.
I think it's latent semantic, but frankly, it doesn't matter. It's a word I use it's a term I use for shorthanding the idea of, hey, we want to signal to Google that we want to make it really easy for Google to understand what the content is about. And so sometimes when I'm creating a brief, whether it's for a content marketer who's in-house or for a writer or whatever, I'll say, by the way, these are to make it really easy for you, rather than using that cheat code and going through the top 10 results and seeing what all the things are they're covering so we can make sure we cover everything. I'll say, by the way, I've done the analysis already with one of my tools, and here are the things, the topics and words that, if we are doing a comprehensive coverage of this topic, these are the things that should naturally be showing up. which, by the way, are the things that Google will be looking for a strong piece of content given this keyword. And they're also the things that, right, like searchers will be expecting to see given this particular content. So if I'm searching for contact lenses, right, I would expect to see things like if I'm looking for an informational piece on contact lenses, what are the benefits of contact lenses? I would expect and assume that in the resulting high quality piece, I would see mentions of things like your eyes and glasses and vision and optometrist. Right, like those, you would just naturally expect those things to show up. So right. And given that you would expect those things to show up, if they don't show up, Google and visitors are going to go like, this doesn't seem right. This isn't the best piece of content. It doesn't even mention my eyes in this piece about like. So that when we talk about like LSI and kind of related things, and that's not exactly what LSI is. It's more mathematically driven. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where you don't need to worry about those details. What you need to worry about is, again, if you've created a comprehensive piece of content that covers everything people expect to find, that Google will expect to find, you're in good shape in terms of ranking. And the cheat code there, if you don't have tools, like I have a homegrown one, things like Market Muse, ClearScope, they kind of automatically do this for you. They look at the top ranking content and pull out the common concepts and say like, hey, these are the things you should probably be mentioning in your content to make it comprehensive. But the cheat code free way to do that is to look through the top ranking content and going, am I covering all these things? If you have, great. You don't have to worry about LSI and these other things, generally speaking.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Experience and the search intent and making sure that the content is really answering all of the questions and addressing all of the topics that are relevant to that query. Yeah. Great. And I guess just to back it up a little bit for folks who may not necessarily know, I'm not going to go into the technical details, but the LSI thing is like a technology that is somehow integrated into the search algorithm that, basically Google wants to see, does this content include the topics that we think it should include that are also relevant. So as Mike said, if it's contact lenses, they expect to see glasses in there as well, or optometrist or whatever, some content around that. And so they're sort of related keywords or related topics that are generally associated with the content.
Yeah. I mean, there's the math of it, which is kind of over my head, which is it looks at huge corpuses of content and it says, okay, given this particular topic, what is the density or what is the frequency we expect to see different words? And that's how it kind of figures out like, okay, given this particular topic, these are the other things we expect to show up. But again, at the end of the day, all you need to know is, given this topic, what would an expert reasonably expect to see? What topics and words would some expert reasonably expect to see in this piece?
Yeah. Great. So a couple other quick things, and then we do have a couple questions too if we have a little bit more time. I'm going to try to get us here at 10 after.
Okay.
So real quick, featured snippets. So I think that's another one that people are super interested in.
Yeah.
Like a growth hacker, like a shortcut for SEO. So what do we know about featured snippets?
So I think if you're learning how to capture, if you want to learn how to capture featured snippets, probably Moz, for example, Moz.com has some fantastic resources there. So just go search there and there'll be some great how-tos. I think just briefly, if you're trying to get wins from featured snippets, which is not a guarantee, by the way. Featured snippet is the box at the top of some search results that gives you a short answer, which is what Google Home and other Google Home uses to answer like voice questions. Again, you want to focus on intent, right? Like featured snippets that offer definitions, that doesn't do you any good because Google will give the answer in the box and the visitor or the searcher has no reason to click. You want to give the searcher a reason to click to your site. So the featured snippets that tend to be better for us content marketers are things that have question intent, like how to or why does, right? Something that has a longer explanation that's not necessarily going to fit in that compact little box up top, so that they have to click more to go to your site to get the whole story, right? It's almost like a teaser that sends them to your site. So if you're going to focus on featured snippets, focus on the ones that actually will drive clicks, which are the mainly how to and why does, how do, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then I think that's a good point. So again, for those who may not have heard that, Moz has some great research on sort of how you approach that from a strategy and tactic standpoint. But I think the main takeaway is basically you sort of structure your content or add certain sections to your content to try to optimize for those featured snippets specifically where available.
And it's the nice thing is all of these things that we've talked about play so nicely together, as long as you're being clear and concise, and using nice headers. So if you've got a how-to, are you numbering the different steps, which again is just helpful and clean. It's helpful to the user. It's just a clean way to present things. You are already setting yourself up to potentially get that featured snippet slot.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, is that Google sort of in an even different way people to kind of adhere to best practices from a UX perspective.
Yeah, to present clean, helpful content. Yeah.
Great. Well, 100%. I advertised this one in some of our little previews here. So I think we got to jump into the idea of EAT, and BERT, which have been kind of buzzwords in the SEO world lately. So do we want to unpack each of those? Maybe start with EAT.
I'll start with BERT just because it's the easier one. We can knock it out super quickly, and then I'll try not to go on too long about EAT. So BERT, very generally speaking, very simply, just means Google is getting better at natural language processing. It's getting better at understanding questions like long questions that people enter into search. And it's super cool. It's really neat how Google is so good at understanding the intent behind like what, practically speaking, are very complicated questions that sometimes people enter in. There's no optimizing for it. It doesn't change anything about the way we operate as content marketers and content creators. Don't worry about it, is the point. EAT. So Google's just getting smarter. As long as we're creating high quality content that kind of follows these guidelines I've been talking about, you're already in good shape. You don't need to change anything. EAT is this idea that expertise, authority, and trust are important to Google. They mention it in the big guidebook that they give to their human content graders that help inform their algorithms. EAT is something they're supposed to look for, and there are ways that they quantify EAT in these guidelines. The kicker is it's not clear how they would quantify these things in their algorithms. It's not necessarily, EAT is not something you can necessarily quantify in an algorithm that you can look for, but there are certainly things we should be doing just to play it safe. And also, again, because it's the right thing for our user. This is EAT, this idea of showing expertise and authority and trust, is especially important for what is called your money or your life sites, which are basically anything about health, anything about your finances. I have a feeling that Google, maybe even manually, is looking a little bit more closely at these sites to see how trustworthy and authoritative they are, and are they really developed by experts. So if you're creating health-related content, if you're not a doctor, you're, generally speaking, maybe it's a stretch to say it's going to be harder to get that content to rank, but it's been clear that Google has been favoring content that's written by authoritative sources, especially the more sensitive the content is, the more authoritative the source is, which is why, like, regardless of the topic, I really like to see author boxes on blog posts, because I want to see, like, was this written by a generic content writer person, or was this written by somebody who actually, like, knows what they're talking about given the subject matter. That's important to me as a searcher and as a visitor, right? And again, it's one of those things where maybe it is, we're erring to the side of safety, important to Google as well, either as a direct or indirect ranking factor. Having an about page on your site that's informative and not just like a couple of lines showing how clear and how clever and mysterious you are, but actually like telling it, why should I be impressed with the people who founded the company? Why are they the best people to have founded this company? Do you have easily accessible contact information? Do you look legit, or are you one of these like sketchy locksmiths who create all these like spammy ads on Google, spammy placements on Google Maps, and you don't actually have an office? Like, Great. Do you have a location and a phone number and a contact information? Put that on your site. Make it really clear and accessible. That's good for users, and it also signals to Google you're trustworthy. Yeah, these are all things that feed into this idea. Like, objectively, we know these are all signals that add to trust and authority. To the extent to which Google uses them, it's unclear to us. But we should be doing it anyway, because why not? It's good for our users, and it's being on the safe side in terms of ranking anyway.
Yeah, that's a great encapsulation. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind is I think especially now more than ever, right? We're in this sort of era of everyone talking about fake news, and anyone can make any site and write about any topic, but are those people legitimately giving you good advice, or are they just selling you products, or what? What's the intent behind that content? And it's really important to differentiate yourself in that way. Cool. Well, those are most of the questions that I wanted to jump through today. We did get a bunch of questions here in the chat, which we will not, unfortunately, have a ton of time to go through. But I did want to just take on this last question if you have a couple minutes.
Sure. And if it's okay, like, I'm happy to stick around afterwards for anybody who wants to stick around to go through and answer some of those questions, because I know some of those folks have been waiting a while. I'm happy to stick around afterwards, and whoever can stay, if that's all right.
Sure. Well, yeah, we'll see if we see how we can do that. Maybe we'll move it to the community. But yeah, I just want to Brent this question, which is so say you are looking at the search results and trying to kind of compare your content versus what already ranks, and everything up there is a 2,000 word ultimate guide, but you've written an article and you think it's already comprehensive at 500 words. How do you kind of parse those?
So I'd be curious to know if this is a kind of speculative or rhetorical question, about a situation that hasn't necessarily come up. I'd be interested in seeing the specific example, because this is one of those cases where I would lean into what's working. That's the rule of thumb I would follow first. If Google is ranking 2,000 word posts, unless you're super confident that your 500 word version is the comprehensive version, and you feel really good about passing the expert litmus test, I would lean into what's working. I would go like, okay, what am I missing here? In fact, this goes against kind of what I was saying earlier about if I'm going through what's already ranking and I want to make sure mine is it doesn't have to be brilliant to win. It just has to be better than everybody else. What are all these other top 10 results, including in theirs, that I don't already have in mind? Right. So yeah. I'm hard pressed to imagine this example where most of the top ranking content is 2,000 words and I have a 500 word piece and I'm like, yeah, this is good enough. It's hard to imagine that situation coming up given what we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I would say too, just as another reminder, this is something that I have to remind myself of constantly, and certainly talk with clients about, is that the nice thing is that just because you publish something and it's 500 words, if it doesn't work, you can always go edit it.
Yep, you can always change it. Version 2.0, 100%. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's a good one. And we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I think there's a whole other message to be sent there about sort of the freshness of content too. And I think it actually behooves many people to sort of iterate on content rather than thinking of it as it's out in the world now, it can never change, kind of monolith. Cool. Well, all right. Well, I'm gonna cut us off there. I really appreciate you, Mike, hanging on for an extra 15 here and all that stuff. So first of all, thanks again so much, Mike, for joining us. Anyone who's watching, you can find Mike online. He's an SEO consultant, works with a lot of wonderful companies, including ourselves and our clients. His website is just mikesonders.com. Is that right, Mike?
That's right. Yep. With the strange spelling of my last name, which is just SONDERS. But yeah, mikesonders.com.
Yeah, great. And then just one last plug here. Mike is also a member of our community, Top of the Funnel, and you can find that yesoptimist.com/TOFU, Top of the Funnel. And I think he'll hopefully pop in there and be able to answer some of the other questions that we didn't have a chance to get to today.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. If you've still got questions and you want me to answer them, I'll hang out in the Ask and Answer group, which feels like the appropriate group of the Slack channel. If you want to ask those questions, and I'll get back to you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Mike, so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and thanks for sharing everything.
Thanks for having me.
All right, awesome, and thanks for everyone who joined us today. We'll have more of these coming in the future, so stay tuned.
Okay.
All right. Cheers.
See ya.